The Earth is a marvel, unique, versatile, multifaceted. Around 200 million years ago, the supercontinent of Pangaea broke up into what human beings today call home, our continents. Asia, larger and more contradictory than any other natural environment.
The Asiatic continent is definitely a continent of extremes.
Extremes of nature that shape lives and revolutionize nutrition. A continent that is home to 4.5 billion people. A powerhouse of progress. Pace setter for prosperity. Asia, the cradle of civilization. The Himalayas, the roof of the world. Its history began around 20 million years ago. The Indian continental plate moved northwards at around 20 centimeters a year, colliding with the Asian continental plate. The collision forced broad mountain ranges to fold upwards in the middle of the continent. The Himalayas. It's the highest mountain range in the world, and it's still growing. More than 1 centimeter every year. With its 10 8,000-meter peaks, the Himalayas create very different climate zones.
The Himalayan mountain range divides Asia, or at least cuts off the Indian subcontinent and helps create this dynamic and dominant weather system of the monsoon rains and the seasonality of wind direction and rainfall.
In the summer months, trade winds bring rain, but the Himalayas are too high for the heavy clouds and create a climatic divide. The summer monsoon offloads its precipitation on the slopes of these 8,000-meter giants. The rain feeds the mighty rivers at their feet. They, in turn, become the lifelines of the south. Like the Yangtze, the third longest river in the world. The Ganges, the second largest river in the north of India. Or the Mekong, the mother of all rivers. Water creates ideal conditions for a plant that has become a driver of human development: rice. In the Lao Cai province in the north of Vietnam, it is still cultivated on terraces today.
Southeast Asia today wouldn't be as it is without rice. As a crop, it is very adaptable. It can grow on all sorts of conditions, on flooded riverbeds, on upland fields, on irrigated land. And it is very productive in the sense that it can ripen very quickly.
Farming families harvest up to 3 times a year.
Rice cultivation is the occupational tradition of our family, our ethnic group. I will preserve the rice farming profession and pass it on to my children and grandchildren in the future.
It was for rice that people went from being nomads to settled farmers. The arduous labor is worth it. A single panicle can bear up to 3,000 grains. The grains are threshed directly on site and packed in 50-kilogram sacks. Rice can be stored like this for years, a sustainable food. Wet rice can be grown in monoculture for thousands of years without harming nature. Wild rice was originally a dry plant. It was only around 3,000 years BCE that humans began planting it in water to protect it from pests and weeds. The rice plant developed an aeration system for its roots to avoid rotting in stagnant water.
Agriculture is a technology, and in fact, every one of the crops which we've domesticated from wild species and perfected and improved from a human point of view over selective breeding, each of those plants is in effect a technology. And by optimizing that production of nutrition for human bodies and creating a food surplus, that was what fundamentally enabled these burgeoning human populations and settling down into denser and denser settlements. Villages became towns, became cities, became empires.
Nature creates culture. Wherever rice was cultivated in Southeast Asia, settlements sprang up, then trade routes and cities. The Southeast became the leading force of the continent. It's still home to most of the world's urban centers. Eight of the world's 10 biggest metropolises are in Southeast Asia. They include Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and Beijing, each with more than 20 million inhabitants.
Southeast Asia is a very diverse region. Rice really kind of binds these different national cultures together in a way.
Rice feeds many in difficult conditions. In Hanoi, too, at 1,000 years old, it's one of the oldest capital cities in Asia. The Old Quarter is the oldest urban settlement area in Vietnam. More than 500,000 people inhabit 1 square kilometer, 8 times more than in New York City. Cramped conditions dictate how people cohabit. Space is expensive. Shop owners were taxed per meter of shop frontage. In the previous century, this meant that instead of building sideways, people built upwards, higher and higher. In a hot, humid climate, this close proximity creates ideal conditions for disease. To protect themselves, people used hot spices that are still typical of the local cuisines today. Ginger is effective against inflammation and nausea. Black cardamom aids digestion and is antispasmodic. No Vietnamese pho broth can do without it. Chilies help reduce pain and strengthen the immune system. Mustard greens are rich in dietary fiber, but they spoil quickly in a warm, humid climate. Fermentation helps avoid this. It's one of the oldest ways of preserving food. For the traditional dish dua moi, mustard greens are cut up and pickled in a mixture of sugar, salt, vinegar, chili, and garlic.
I think this dish will last forever. The climate of Vietnam is hot. Natural fermentation helps us to feel refreshed and cool when eating. Pickling began in ancient times. It's good for the digestive system. It helps us to digest better.
In Korea, they have kimchi, pickled and preserved Chinese cabbage and radish. The origins of sushi are also Vietnamese. To preserve fish, it's rolled in cooked rice.
Pickled vegetables are tasty and easy to eat. Both rich and poor people like eating pickles.
In the southeast of the continent, the unique conditions of nature also pose great challenges for people. Unique cultural skills are the answer. The conditions on the continent drive innovation. In Southwest Asia, the conditions are completely different. Here, water shortage determines people's lives. But it was not always like this. Mesopotamia. It means between the rivers. This refers to the Euphrates and Tigris rivers that rise in the east of Turkey and flow into the Persian Gulf. Around 12,000 years ago, the Arabian Peninsula was still green, thanks to it being located in a climate zone with abundant rain clouds. But then, the Earth changed its rotation around the Sun, and its axis shifted. This impacted the path of the Sun and position of the cloud band. As a result, rain became scarce. In Africa, the Sahara emerged, and in Asia, a bone-dry flank.
The verdant, green, fertile crescent became no longer so fertile as with increasing aridity, and that would have caused, a lot of social disruption and problems and anxiety. That was one of the things that helped spark the birth of Abrahamic religions.
Around 2000 BCE, Ur was still a flourishing oasis metropolis on the Euphrates. But as the population grew, water became increasingly scarce. To distribute resources equally and maintain social order, the ruler issued the world's first collection of laws, the Code of Ur-Nammu. Such laws were later attributed to the god Yahweh. According to tradition, a certain Abraham from Ur received a tempting offer, a life in the promised land with enough water. In return, he had to submit to Yahweh's will. For this reason, Abraham is often held to be the progenitor of the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What they have in common is the belief in a single God. His laws regulated everyday life with scarce resources.
Religion, in a certain sense, serves as some kind of supernatural police force to make societies work. And perhaps that is particularly the case in more harsh and extreme environments, which are very resource-limited, perhaps very limited in the availability of water. You really need a society to be able to pull together, and you can't afford cheats in your society.
Laws dating back thousands of years still shape the lives of Jews in Jerusalem today. The everyday life of devout Jews is determined by religion. On the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath, there is absolute silence. Sabbath rules regulate many details. Originally, making fire was forbidden. Translated into the present day, this means that electrical appliances may not be switched on. These rules are not always easy to reconcile with everyday life today. An institute in Jerusalem has been founded especially to provide solutions. Rabbis, engineers, and programmers work together to develop devices that can also run on the Sabbath. There's a great need for an everyday life that respects the rules while still being convenient.
The institute was founded over 50 years ago as a result of technological developments. I personally receive around 50 queries daily, whether by phone, mail, or via the Institute's website, Ask the Rabbi. There are dozens of inquiries every day.
Because for many, modern life is not at all Sabbath compliant.
I stay overnight at a hotel and see that everything is electronic. The lights go on, the air conditioning goes on, the toilet flushes automatically. What should I do? These things are a problem for Jews on the Sabbath.
Phone calls are also taboo on the Sabbath, with one exception.
I'm holding one of our most popular products, where the Institute has been involved in both the development and sale of this product. It is a Sabbath phone intended for emergencies for the security forces and the medical staff who depend on communication facilities on the Sabbath, under the circumstances that are permitted, of course, when it is a matter of life and death.
If the electric circuit is closed automatically, not by human hand, then the device is Sabbath compliant.
We check absolutely every parameter individually. We want to see that everything has been done according to our specifications. This means that opening the door must not have any effect on the compressor's activity, on defrosting. I can see that here on the display.
Every refrigerator bearing our Sabbath device certificate represents about 18 months of work. We have appliances from the biggest international companies, including Samsung, Sharp, LG, with dozens of models. They assemble our Sabbath appliances directly in Japan or South Korea.
Their inventions are not produced exclusively for the Israeli market. Kitchen appliances featuring a Sabbath mode can be found in many households around the globe, often unnoticed. For believers, however, the millennia-old rules still provide structure in their everyday lives today. Further south on the Arabian Peninsula, life is dominated by the desert. The conditions are highly unfavorable for a settled existence. As a result, for a very long time, most of the people living here were nomadic. That only changed when the Earth gave up a very precious treasure. Deep below the surface here lie layers of rock that are rich in organic material. Tectonic shifts provided the heat needed for liquid to rise from deeper layers. It collected in porous rock and formed the natural wealth of Arabia: oil. In the 1930s, this lured foreign investors to the region. Yet no one suspected that the Arabian Peninsula held 1/5 of the oil reserves of the entire planet. In the beginning, 3,000 barrels a day flowed from the wells. Today, Saudi Arabia produces 3 times that amount and is the world's 3rd largest oil producer, after the USA and Russia, both far larger in terms of area. The black gold rapidly changed society. A nomadic society became an urban one. The population figures exploded. At the beginning of the oil boom, barely 3 million people lived in the newly found kingdom, but the number doubled within 20 years and has since risen to almost 35 million inhabitants. Oil and now gas are the fuel of daily life. They generate all the electricity in Saudi Arabia, 3/4 of which is used for air conditioning and refrigeration. But the reserves are finite. This is a challenge that the people will have to adapt to.
Ecology plays a role, but ecology isn't destiny. Humans have clever ways of working with ecology and reshaping it a bit.
So now, the Saudis use what nature gives them without end, the sun. But at the same time, the sun endangers human life in this region. In the last 20 years, summer heat extremes, with temperatures far above 40 degrees centigrade, have become more frequent on the Arabian Peninsula. Experts fear heat collapse. This could make the area uninhabitable in the foreseeable future. Further north on the Asian continent, the picture is not dominated by desert, but by the steppes. Grasslands that are unique around the world. After the last ice age, forests returned everywhere around the northern hemisphere except here. In the interior, it rains too seldom and too little for trees to grow. Ideal conditions for wild horses, though. When horse and man first encountered each other, an alliance was forged that decisively changed their existence, not only in the steppes, but far beyond. The steppe people already succeeded in domesticating the horse 5,500 years ago. Through natural selection and breeding, horses became larger and were suitable to ride. In this way, the nomads expanded their area of influence immensely. In the 12th century, they became powerful players in the history of the world. Genghis Khan and the golden horde of his descendants created the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed on Earth. At 40 meters high, the world's largest equestrian statue commemorates the founding father of the Mongol nation.
Genghis Khan was not only the greatest warlord, he was also the person who knew best how to breed Mongolian horses, how to care for them, and how to deploy them in long, drawn-out wars. The horse was an innovation, so to speak, a completely new item that changed life in Mongolia, the lives of nomads in general, society, and the economy.
This is why Genghis Khan is revered almost mythically in Mongolia to this day, especially because he succeeded in uniting the Mongolian clans and tribes. The tradition of meeting once a year for the Erin Guran Nadam also dates from this time. Today, people no longer compete against one another in war, but in sports. And although Erin Guran Nadam means the 3 games of men, women have always taken part and compared their skills in archery, wrestling, and of course, horse racing, in memory of one of the most powerful transformations in history.
Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes were a steppe nomadic people that built a vast empire, the largest land empire of human history, coming out of the steppes in the 1200s. And although their campaign of conquest was one of blood and violence, once they had established the empire and the Pax Mongolica, the period of quiet and stability, it became a golden age of trade across the Silk Roads. Huge amounts of trade goods traveled back and forth across the Silk Roads.
A groundbreaking invention in the 13th century was the mounted post system in Mongolia. Spaced at regular intervals of around 30 kilometers, the posts kept horses, food, and new messengers at the ready. A network of trade routes emerged in the steppes, enabling the exchange of ideas and goods throughout the then-known world. The highway of the Middle Ages stretched from the Baltic Sea to China. The lively interaction of peoples has left lasting traces in human genetic material. The conditions in the steppes still shape life today. Mongolia is the most sparsely populated country on Earth. Just 2.1 people share 1 square kilometer. In Germany, there are 233, and in Singapore, almost 8,000 people in the same space. Working animals are clearly in the majority. Official figures state that there are more than 67 million horses, goats, and sheep for every 3.3 million Mongolians. Livestock farming is key to providing the Mongolians with meat. And the green steppes defines the nomadic lives of the herdsmen.
The landscape is suitable for these herds, but they quite rapidly deplete the local environment, so they need to kind of keep moving. And the steppe is vast, so you can just keep sort of nomadic pastoralism is what pays off in that environment.
A herdsman will sit for hours in the saddle. The traditional Mongolian saddle that dates back to the time of Genghis Khan protects both horse and rider. It's adapted to suit the shorter upper body of the Mongolian horse and protects their back. Stirrups give the rider added stability, another invention inherited from the steppe tribes.
We should not forget history. This is a very important item for the Mongol people. Where there is a Mongolian family, Mongolian men, there should also be a horse, in my opinion.
Although they're nearly as small as ponies, the toughness and strength of Mongolian horses are considered unrivaled. They can cover up to 35 kilometers at full gallop. Catching them is no easy task. At the second attempt, the herdsman has the horse safely lassoed. It's not just Mongolian horses that don't give in, neither do their riders. The connection between humans and horses goes far beyond practical benefits. It's also spiritual. The hair of the mane, for example, is considered sacred. A herdsman will regularly cut tufts from the mane. They're said to keep harm away from the family, including its horses. Mongolian children learn to ride almost before they can walk. But it will still take some time before this 3-year-old can ride out across the steppes with his siblings. The focal point of life for this family of 6 is the yurt, which measures around 25 square meters. It is kitchen, dining room, and bedroom all rolled into one. And classroom too.
За тэгэхээр энэ дээр бол
Girls are usually cared for more and sent away to school in urban areas to get an education. In Mongolian society, the men are busy with the cattle and lead a traditional life.
Homeschooling via internet has long been part of everyday life for boys in Mongolia. 16-year-old Namjil Ma attends secondary school with the ambition of studying further. But to do that, she will have to go far away from her family to the Mongolian capital. More and more people are drawn to Ulaanbaatar because of the career prospects. Its population has tripled in the last 30 years. As a result, the city struggles with housing shortages, overpopulation, and gridlock. Kilometer-long traffic jams are the order of the day. The reason? After being relocated more than 25 times in its history, the city is now in a place where it simply cannot grow.
Ulaanbaatar is surrounded by mountains. The city cannot expand in terms of area. There is no infrastructure for building a larger city, so no satellite cities can be created, which poses a dilemma for the future development of Ulaanbaatar.
Because its schools, universities, and medical care are becoming increasingly attractive. This is why Ulaanbaatar will continue to grow, and with it, the problem of urbanizing an area in a natural environment that seems almost infinite. To the north, Siberia, dominated by icy cold and permafrost. For a long time, hardly anyone ventured into its dense spruce, larch, and pine forests. One of the Earth's biggest treasure troves is stored below ground. Over the course of millions of years, valuable minerals formed in the rock layers, especially metals, and they turn pristine nature into a very particular habitat for humans. Copper was the key to early human settlement here, but its mining awakened greed at the other end of the continent. In the 16th century, the Russian Tsar Ivan IV, nicknamed the Terrible, pushed Russia's expansion eastwards to secure mineral resources and access to the Pacific. In addition to voluntary settlers, millions of people were forcibly sent to Siberia. Mirny was founded in 1959 after kimberlite was found in the region, rock that can bear diamonds. The kimberlite pipe at Mirny is testimony to man's lust for gemstones. This is said to be the deepest man-made hole in the world. 1,200 meters in diameter and nearly 1 kilometer deep, the diamonds were mined here in the frozen ground. Living conditions in the mining city are equally harsh. Winter lasts 7 months. Temperatures in the city regularly drop to minus 50 degrees centigrade. Life here is also characterized by its remoteness. The only way in or out is by plane. All roads end at the city's limits.
We can generally say that in cold climates with cold winters, the way of compensation maybe for this is to be more warm and friendly with each other, which is, of course, also this condition of survival together.
The reason is its location in the middle of the continent. No region in the world is further away from a coast. The result? In winter, the whole region is one big ice desert. Communal ice fishing is the easiest way to stock up on fresh food. Conditions are ideal at the beginning of November. In a few weeks, the ice will be too thick to drill a hole.
That's our Yakutia. It gets down to minus 70 degrees here.
Dealing appropriately with the conditions that nature sets is essential for survival.
Since my childhood, I've been a hunter and a fisherman. The ability to survive is taught, so to speak, from childhood onwards. How do you make a fire in the taiga, for example? Left to their own devices in nature, they do have to know the basics.
This includes knowing the right nutrition for survival here.
We live here in harmony with nature. Although we live in the 21st century, that hasn't changed. Reindeer and fur boots are still the most important thing. And of course, the food. Everything has to contain meat. For example, frozen fish, frozen liver, frozen meat. That gives us vitamins and energy to survive in the north.
In many regions of Siberia, there is this traditional dishes that either contain raw blood, which contains a lot of vitamin C and prevents people from having the scurvy. So that's also one way to keep yourself and your body healthy in those regions where you don't get much vitamins and don't get much sun.
Life in this region shows once again how adaptable man is. Further east, the Pacific Ring of Fire is the most active volcanic region in the world. It stretches along the Pacific Plate. Where this collides with other plates, it generates constant friction. Earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis are the result. For the people of the island states of Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Taiwan, these are a part of everyday life. The Earth in Japan shakes noticeably more than 170 times a month. 7 times a year, these earthquakes reach at least a 5 on the Richter scale, the level at which significant damage can happen. Early warning systems are meant to help. Important for one of Asia's densest metropolitan areas, Tokyo has been the largest city in the world for more than 60 years. The metropolitan area of the Japanese capital is home to 37 million inhabitants, and the trend is rising. Tokyo is considered by many to be the city of the future, born out of tremendous destruction. 150 years ago, Tokyo was called Edo, a city with 1 million inhabitants and simple wooden buildings. The Great Earthquake of 1923 had a lasting impact. At the time, almost half of all residential buildings in the Tokyo prefecture lay in ruins. 70% of all inhabitants were made homeless. More than 100,000 died. Part of the reason was the construction method. The city's houses, made of wood and paper, burned down.
The environment that a society finds itself in can drive the process of rejuvenation or a society refreshing itself. If you're living in a very unstable, perhaps dangerous environment, with frequent earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, you're constantly needing to rebuild and repair and rejuvenate. But the environment might also have an effect on the cultural software, if you like, that arises.
In the course of its history, Japan has experienced many disastrous earthquakes. The constant threat of natural disasters is also reflected in its culture. For a long time, depictions were common of a giant catfish that triggered the earthquakes. This catfish was the predecessor of a creature as powerful as a force of nature. Godzilla became the epitome of Japanese pop culture. Around 100 years after the Great Quake, Tokyo glitters in a sea of lights amongst concrete and glass. Nearly 500 skyscrapers dominate the skyline, most of them earthquake-proof, according to today's standards. However, there is no effective protection against the often capricious summer weather. It can turn the famous Shibuya crossing into a sea of umbrellas. Heavy rainfall, sometimes lasting for days and leading to flooding, is the order of the day. To prevent major catastrophes, the Japanese rely on technology. This control room is reminiscent of the early construction period, 1992. The somewhat inconspicuous entrance betrays no sign of what lies below ground. It took 15 years to build a system consisting of 6.5 kilometers of concrete tunnels at a depth of 50 meters. The largest underground drainage system in the world.
This system has unprecedented dimensions. It was designed to cope with floods that might happen once every 100 years.
But Japan is being hit by torrential rain more and more frequently. The Japanese speak of so-called guerrilla rain. About 7 times a year, the underground tunnel also diverts these huge quantities of water, preventing the streets of Tokyo from turning into raging rivers. The traces of the last flood are still visible in the subterranean cathedral. It will not stay dry for long.
We expect that as a result of global warming, these storms will simply get more severe. And this applies especially to precipitation, meaning we'll have to reckon with extreme flooding more and more frequently. And there are also limits to our ability to adapt.
Natural disasters have strongly influenced the Japanese attitude towards life, or life and death. As a result, the Japanese have learned not to resist nature, but instead to yield to its forces and live in harmony with it.
It's not only the increased frequency of typhoons that has made resistance seem futile. On the contrary, the instability and destruction caused by natural disasters has instead created very special cultural techniques, including a unique ceramic art.
Kintsugi is the process of repairing broken pottery and decorating the broken area. It is a traditional Japanese repair technique. The aim is not only to be able to use a cherished object for as long as possible, but to make it even more beautiful than it was before. Kintsugi gives us the strength to accept and cope with imperfection. Even when the heart is broken, we try to hide it or pretend not to notice. In Kintsugi, I see the broken vessel and feel it reflects part of my soul. Not to hide one's own painful past, but to manage it. I think Kintsugi gives us this power.
Japan is a country where the forces of nature make people aware of impermanence. This concept accompanies Japanese people in their everyday lives. They call it mono no aware. It is the bittersweet realization that everything ends. In the east of the continent of Asia lies the mountainous land of China. 2/3 of the country are at altitudes higher than 1,000 meters. From very early on, China has had to struggle with the narrowness of its territory between deserts and mountains. Outward expansion is almost impossible due to the many natural barriers. China is hemmed in. Conflicts and wars over land and resources have determined its history.
Even just within the frontiers of China, we see this intimate connection between the landscape and the geography and the human world of where people choose to live and farm and where the most populous cities are found.
The Warring States period from the 5th century to 221 BCE has gone down in history. Principalities fought over the limited fertile space. Once conquered, it was protected with border walls. Parts of the longest one still stand today, the Great Wall of China, the largest structure of all time. Geographically, too, it forms a special dividing line.
And so the Great Wall of China, when you think about it, was a defensive barrier to keep out the barbarians from the north. But in a very fundamental sense, the Great Wall of China followed what is effectively an ecological boundary. It separated the dry steppe lands, the grasslands to the north, with a lifestyle of nomadic pastoralism, from the southern regions, which were much wetter, supporting agriculture of millet and rice.
To this day, geology determines the living space of the Chinese people. The Earth's surface here resembles a staircase with 3 steps from east to west. In the west are the mountains with heights of over 7,000 meters. In the middle, plateaus, and in the east, the deep and fertile plains. People have been settling here since the beginning. You can see it particularly well at night. Large parts of China remain dark, but the cities and megacities form clusters in the east towards the Pacific. This is where 90% of the Chinese population live.
These cities and ports strung along the coastline of China were all in close contact and communication with each other. It was all about building a network of population centers where they could exchange not just trade, but ideas and developments and advancements. So a lot of the progression of Chinese history came from that network effect of the population being clustered into a particular region and being in close communication with each other.
The advantages were concentrated knowledge and close proximity. This is why these centers are the engine of the Chinese economy. In China's big cities, huge billboards and neon signs dominate the cityscape. The general message is, consume as they do in the West. This drives the economy, along with internal power.
China's own domestic market has increased very fast. It is still growing, and it does provide big support for its economy, especially in the recent years.
The tech industry in particular is booming and influences everyday life. For smartphone junkies, there's a well-established term, the bowed head tribe. To avoid collisions, some cities, like Chongqing, have set up special lanes for smartphone users on the sidewalks. 783 million people, more than half China's population, already live in urban areas. By the year 2030, China is expected to have over 1 billion urban dwellers. Also because China is geologically endowed with other unique advantages in the east. There is plenty of space for big ports on the Pacific coast, the world's largest ocean. Of the 20 largest container ports in the world, 13 are in Asia. Over the past 20 years, Asia's economic expansion has almost tripled the volume of container traffic, both eastwards and westwards, across the Pacific Ocean. Experts agree that there is no end in sight to the rise of Asia. In China alone, 8 million students graduate every year. From a European perspective, Asia has always been the continent of the rising sun. And, in fact, a new day seems to have dawned for this continent. And Asia is once again becoming the pace setter of the world.